The yawning thing. Sean has it. See, I think apparently it's genetic. It's like you either have it or you don't. Like it's like people who like cilantro and people who don't. Some people just. I love cilantro. I don't think so. I don't know. I am. Yeah, but that's not why I'm yawning. All right. Marba melon gambo dozom je gonjen garmamba je jonje jambanzenanda Doin zo zom ba den ro ba zo za lan ja jon ja lang an ye nya me ro gan dam bo gan ja la so wa de zo Jumban zeno namda jinjalop Elongom jigamba zombajin Senoragon loin jorgen mebadam Senderandon don jabegom jela Nyengorjen ba meba jinjela Megagom jingo zombajin Jamin Magan Jawan Jinjalo Yang men gom jing a zom bajin Kanjar dom beng o zomane Jun den gara jom beng gom jela Gomjalo don rawa jinjalo nam dong o jogor zombajin jion mayin jirion jarwala Magaro bara jarve gom jela de yermen dom ba jela jewa gondo yondo lama Rame Jambala Sadam lam je yende razone dorje jange goban yordosh. So far, we've looked at 3 of the 4 mindfulnesses. A mindfulness of body, which is in the common vehicle taught in order to overcome the illusion of cleanliness. In the Mahayana, to overcome the illusion that the body is a indivisible, substantial entity, and is connected with the first of the 4 fruition paramitas, the paramita of great purity. We looked at mindfulness of sensations, and we saw that in the common vehicle, it's used to overcome the illusion of pleasure or fun. In the Mahayana, again, to determine the emptiness of sensations through analysis, and that it is connected with the second of the paramitas, and they're not always in the same order, so don't be too worried about that, but a great pleasure or great bliss. And finally, we looked at mindfulness of mind, which is the mind looking at itself, and we saw that it is taught in the common vehicle to overcome the illusion of selfhood. In the Mahayana, similarly, to determine the mind's emptiness, and is connected with the paramita of great selfhood. Now we turn to the final one of the 4. And again, I've seen these presented in different sequences. So this sequence is the one that I think I learned first, and it's the one that makes the most sense to me. But sometimes mindfulness of mind will be last, and mindfulness of dharmas will be first. Now, the term dharma means about 10 different things. It can mean duty, law, social obligations, religion, spirituality, spiritual path, the truth, and all sorts of things. But one of the 10 things it means is things in general. Anything you can call a thing. And the reason why the word dharma is used for that is that a thing is identifiable as a thing because it appears to retain identifiable attributes. Things appear to hold on to their attributes. So, for example, this morning, this table was a table. I expected that this afternoon, when I came back here, it would still be a table. I did not expect it to turn into a pink dragon or a green elephant or a tiger or a puppy dog. I would have been very surprised. And we call that thing, a dharma, because it holds or retains, or appears to hold or retain its attributes. And dharma kind of means a holder. It's related to the word dar, to hold, like vajradhara, vajra holder. And so a dharma is a dharma because it appears to us to retain the same characteristics. However, as we've seen through our investigation of impermanence. And mindfulness of dharmas is in the common vehicle, is the contemplation or meditation taught in order to overcome the illusion of permanence. As we've seen, things are not really things. For a thing to be a thing, it would have to be in a state of stasis. It would have to be the same thing over some period of time. Could be a very brief period of time. It could be a longer period of time. But that never happens. Things never stay the same. They change in a subtle, incremental way, and eventually they fall apart. So, therefore, there is no such thing as a thing. There is only process. However, it also came up this morning that until you reach the first bodhisattva level, you can't really directly experience the emptiness of external objects, external things. You can prove it through reasoning, through science, through philosophy, but you can't experience it directly. So in the practice of mindfulness of things, we use dharma, the same definition, but focused a little more particularly. I'll explain. We have 5 senses, but we have 6 faculties. We can see, hear, smell, taste, feel, by which I mean tactile sensations. But we also can experience things with our mind that are not what we see, hear, smell, taste, and touch. So, for example, I can imagine something and I experience my imagination of it. I can remember something and I experience my memory of it. I can think about things and I experience those thoughts. We've also seen how when we experience through the senses, eventually that experience becomes mental. To become conscious experience, it has to be mental or cognitive, finally. And so our mental faculty, our mental consciousness, does 2 things. It receives information from the 5 sense faculties, the senses. And then it comments on them. Now, yesterday we looked at 3, quoting Jongelo Dutai, 3 phases. But we can simply think of it as 2 for our purpose this afternoon. The mental faculty, as Trungpa Rinpoche puts it, has both a non-conceptual and a conceptual style of operation. Its non-conceptual style of operation is simply to replicate or produce a simile of, or transmit, you could say, the data that comes from the senses. And its conceptual functioning we know all too well. It's thinking. Thinking about things of the senses and thinking about other things. So therefore, when in the Abhidharma we break down these 6 faculties and their objects, or we list them rather, we say the object of the eye faculty is visible forms, shapes and colors that light and your sense organs allow you to see. The object of the ear faculty is sounds. The object of the tongue faculty is taste. The object of the nose faculty is smells. The object of the tactile faculty is physical sensations, both internal and on the surface, like when you touch something to your skin. And the object of the mental faculty is dharmas, things. So things refers to things, but with the understanding that things, to be perceived as a thing, it must be an object of mind. I'll give you a very simple example of this. We all agree that this is a table because it was obviously made to be a table. I don't know who made it, but it was made to be a table for use at this height when you're sitting basically on the ground. And it has many attributes of a table. It has the top is a little bit wider, has a little bit of an overhang than the sides and legs. It has a shelf underneath, which is helpful. It's got beveled edge things nailed to it. So we all agree that it's a table because clearly it's meant to be a table. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's useful that we agree it's a table because we are engaging in accordance with mundane custom, which is one of the things you're supposed to do. If you're a Mahayanist, you're supposed to get along with the world and not be weird unless there's a really good reason for it. So it's fine to call this a table. But if none of us had ever seen it, and if the carpenter who built it had died, and no one else had ever seen it, let's say the carpenter who built it died, it was left in the workshop, no human being ever saw it, of what would its tableness consist? We would then say, well, it could be a table if there were a person to see it and use it as such. It's a table because we want to call it a table. It's convenient to call these things tables. We could call them other things. We could call them portable hutches at a very, very low height. We could call them, those wooden things. It's all just concepts. So the thing itself that I see and feel is changing constantly. So it doesn't really exist. And the tableness, the label of the thing as table, is just a thought. So when we practice mindfulness of things, we mean mindfulness of thoughts. Because thoughts include everything. Now, the difference between the practice of this and the practice of mindfulness of mind is that in mindfulness of mind, your mind looks at itself. That which previously looked at your body, looked at sensations, then simply looks at itself. In mindfulness of thoughts, you look at thoughts. You don't look at the content of thoughts. You look at the substance of thoughts, of what are thoughts made. When we look at the content of a thought, we're not looking at the thought. The thought has caused us to think another thought. For example, if I think table, if I look at the thought table, that's one action. But if I look at the content of the thought, the subject of the thought, the table, then I'll have another thought. Who made this? What kind of wood is it? How did they stain it? How old is this? Where did this come from? All that's the difference. When you look at a thought, it disappears. Because the thought is only maintained or prolonged by producing another thought. Thoughts can't last. They're a little bit like diphthongs. A diphthong, no, is not a fashion statement from the 90s. A diphthong is when you have, and we all use one of these all the time in English. Diphthong is when you have a combination of two vowel sounds that produce what seems to be a third vowel sound, but is actually the transition from one to the other. I'll give you the simplest English language example. I. Doesn't matter whether you mean I like me or I that sees. The sound I. We think of that, since we write I with one letter, as one vowel. But it's not one vowel. And to prove it, try to prolong the sound I. You can't. Because I is quickly saying ah and quickly saying e. That's all it is. That's why in parts of this country, when the diphthongs get eliminated, like in the South, people will say ah or ah. Because they're just getting rid of part of the diphthong. And so you try it. Try to say I for longer than one split second. You can't. You're either saying the ah part or the e part. Well, thoughts are like that. You can't prolong them. If you prolong them, it's actually another thought. So therefore, what that means is that while thoughts cause all our problems, they cause no problems. We use them to cause all our problems, but the thoughts themselves cause no problems. Regardless of what thought I have, if I look at that thought and don't cause that thought to lead to another thought, it just disappears. It goes. So this is the fourth practice. Now, why is it separate from mindfulness of mind? Since we know, we've heard, we've all, this is not our first rodeo. We've all heard the teaching so many times that they're, leaking out of our every pore. We've heard that thoughts are to mind what waves are to the water in the ocean, that they're simply the upsurge of the stuff of mind. And we know thoughts are made up of mind stuff, and that mind stuff is nothing. We've heard all that. But we need to do the contemplation separately. And this is because when push comes to shove, we need to be able to see through our thoughts. And this is because our suffering is caused by our thoughts. Our negative emotions are carried by thoughts. When you're angry, two things are happening. One thing that's happening is you don't have one angry thought. You may come back to the same angry thought, but there are other angry thoughts in between that keep you coming back to it. You can't prolong an angry thought, a single angry thought, any more than you can prolong the word I. So when you're angry, if you look at your anger, and the anger, looking at the anger is looking at the thought, because that's all it is. The anger at the present moment is the current angry thought. If you look at the anger, you will not produce the next angry thought. For the simple reason that your mind cannot walk and chew gum at the same time. As it says in the Abhidharma, and as Aristotle and many other smart people figured out, your mind cannot walk and chew gum at the same time. We think we can. I think I'm looking at you and thinking about what to say and speaking and sitting here and digesting lunch. But actually my monkey mind is bouncing back and forth between all of these. Look at them, look at this, look at that, think about what to say next, It's bouncing. It's crazy. So if your mind is really looking at the thought that is present at the moment in your mind, you can't produce another thought, which means you can't accumulate karma. As soon as you pay attention to the contents of the thought, and that produces another thought, then that will lead to karmic accumulation. So the reason why we need to have the contemplation or the mindfulness of thoughts separate from mere mindfulness of mind is so that we learn how to deal with our thoughts and our emotions. And the first step, of course, is understanding that our emotions, our moods, don't exist outside our thoughts. We have this belief that emotions exist at some deep level that is subconscious, and that thoughts are not necessary to maintain them. But that's not true. There are subtle thoughts, but there have to be thoughts to maintain. And even the worst bad mood is maintained by a chain of thoughts. Like the worst weather on the surface of the ocean, the worst storm. It's one wave after another. So if we can learn to look at thoughts directly, we are cutting that chain or undoing that chain. The direct benefit of this is that you will see the impermanence of thoughts, which means that you'll see the impermanence of moods as well. You'll experience this. You'll experience that, you start meditating in one mood and your mood changes because the chain of thoughts has been interrupted. It might change for the worse. There's no guarantee here. But it will change. But there's one thing we have to be aware of, and that's the second thing that's going on when we're angry. When I was very young, I could actually see this. Somehow, I'm kind of slow moving, and I think my mind was slow moving when I was young, and I think I could somehow track how anger fools you. And then by the time I was about 7 or 8, I couldn't do it anymore. I was too habituated. When you get angry, the first thought is actually a question. Should I get angry or not? And then the next thing is you come up with an answer. And the answer, of course, is a lie. The answer is, yes, it will feel good. We tell ourselves, before you get full-blown angry, you tell yourself, yeah, it's going to feel good. It will relieve the pressure. And, of course, it doesn't. It has never happened since the dawn of time that at the same moment a being was angry and happy. It's not possible. You can think that getting angry is going to make you happy. You can think that getting angry is going to make you a more effective person in the world. But if you're actually angry, you're not happy. Not at that moment. Now, you may be willing to sacrifice your present happiness for some future goal, but I question how many of these goals can actually be achieved through anger. You can be stern, and there are definitely situations in all our lives that require that, without being angry. Sternness is a demeanor. Fierceness is a demeanor. Anger is an emotional state. And at least in my experience, and I spent much of my life as a very angry person. I was told by my mother that I came out angry. And I think that's probably true. Anger never did me good. Never, ever, once did choosing to become angry ever help. So the first step is using, when you're calm and meditating, looking at the thoughts. And they don't have to be negative thoughts like anger. It can be neutral thoughts, good thoughts. The rule is, in meditation, you treat them all the same. You do not pick favorites. You treat an angry thought, a devoted thought, a kind thought, a selfish thought, all the same in meditation. In post-meditation, you need to, as you're going to act on your thoughts, you need to pick and choose. But in meditation, you don't want to. Because by treating all thoughts as equal, you take back your power from your thinking. Because our thoughts, so to speak, lie to us. Our thoughts say to us, yeah, you should look at your thoughts, but not me. I'm special. I'm a thought you need. Sometimes they say, if you look at my content, you'll feel better, which is never true. Or sometimes they say, you need to think me. I'm good for you. Obviously, there are situations in our lives where we need to think, but not when we're practicing mindfulness of thoughts. You also don't try not to think. You just look at the stuff of which thoughts are made. And you do it, this does have subject and object a little bit, so it's a little bit easier than the third one. You look at it, you know that the thoughts are you. They're the shape your mind is taking. But you look at your thoughts the way you would if you were buying fabric. If you were, let's say, in Varanasi, inspecting, that's where the best fabric is, at least in India, and you were inspecting fabric, you'd look very closely at the warp and the woof, whatever, the threads, the thread count, the whole thing, look to see how it's made. So in looking at thoughts, you're not looking at the design. You do, in Varanasi you would, of course. It's all about the design. But anyway, here you're just concerned with the weave. You want to look at the thoughts and see the threads of which they're made. Not in terms of content, but in terms of stuff. What is thought made of? It must be made of something, because we experience it, right? I mean, I'm talking, obviously I'm thinking in my own disordered way. And so that's not nothing. There must be something there. So let's try this now. And all you have to do is just sit still with your back straight and watch the thoughts that come and go. And try to see what they are made of. Did anyone have the experience that when they looked for a thought, they couldn't find one? Okay. Did anyone have the experience that they were able to find thoughts, but as soon as they did, they vanished? Did anyone have the experience that they were able to find thoughts and they were able to look at the thought for long enough to see its stuff without it vanishing? Okay. There's no gradation of better or worse to these three outcomes. Usually what happens is because our minds are rebellious, when we want a thought, we can't think and we blank out. Or another thing that can happen is the effort of mindfulness itself supersedes the thought. And since your mind can't do two things at once, you actually have to be a little bit distracted to think, if you think about it. If your mind is in a state of, well, there are different, of course, different types of awareness, but what we could call meditative awareness, and I don't mean pure awareness, but simple meditative awareness, it can't, that's what it's doing, and it can't think. So there are different possibilities. Often when people begin to meditate, they experience the uncontrolled proliferation of thought. But that typically happens when they are trying not to think. Most people think that meditation is not thinking. That's what we think. And so even though, you know, and then you're given in the beginning always an object, like the breath or a statue of the Buddha or, you know, whatever. And they don't tell you, don't let your mind include anything but this. They don't say that. They say, just don't lose track of your breath. Don't lose track of the statue. But being all gung-ho as we are, of course, we interpret that to mean I must not allow anything other than awareness of the breath to occur in my mind. Well, of course, the mind won't have that. So your mind immediately starts a waterfall of thoughts. In some cases, these were the thoughts that were there to begin with. You just never paid any attention to them. In other cases, it is actually an increase in thoughts because you're upsetting the apple cart of your mind's usual operating procedure. But when you begin by looking at thoughts, it seems that this uncontrolled proliferation usually doesn't happen in the same way because you're inviting thoughts in. It's helpful, therefore, in almost all levels of meditation, and there are specific techniques which are exceptions to this, as some of you will remember. But it's helpful in general in meditation to invite thoughts. As Lord Gampopa put it, think of thoughts as your friends, as things you need, as indispensable. And of course, the more you do that, the less they'll bother you. But in terms of dealing with emotional difficulties, anger, moods, looking at thoughts is very effective. Now, like looking at pain, in the context of mindfulness of sensations, it's easier, especially in the beginning, if it's not too intense. So if you're going to look at anger, catch it when it's small. Don't wait until you're in a towering rage and you're all red in the face and shaking, and it may not be possible, because by then you may be totally fooled by the anger. It's interesting, traditionally when you teach this stuff, you're supposed to refer to at least the three poisons. You're supposed to say you do this with anger, you do this with desire, and you do this with apathy, bewilderment, laziness, stupidity, and all of that. But there's no point talking about bewilderment and desire in this country that I can see, because we think desire is great. We have medication to help us if we don't get desire. Then we think desire is great, and we've cultivated this. You were mentioning cell phones yesterday, Sally. We've cultivated almost a samadhi of stupidity. We've almost. I'm into this. I play one of those match up 3 jewel things and so on, and it calms me down. But it's really meditation on stupidity. I can feel what it does to my brain. I can feel what I suspect is dopamine increase. But and it really does calm me down. But it shouldn't need that. So there's no point. Let's not talk about desire and stupidity, because we're not willing to give them up. Let's face it. I'm not. So let's just talk about anger. And that's it. So let's review a bit, and then we can have questions and hopefully some arguments and stuff. If we can assume that our meditation practice involves complex techniques like the kind that we tend to do here, devotional practice and so forth, then how can we include these 4 types of mindfulness in our meditation training? Well, mindfulness of body for us is not so much thinking about how much shit there is in our intestines. Mindfulness of body for us is simply being in our bodies. And so at the beginning of a meditation session, you choose your meditation posture, whether it's sitting in a chair or on a cushion, hanging upside down like a bat, whatever. You choose one. And then there's a discipline involved in maintaining that. And it doesn't matter what the posture is, as long as it, generally we like postures where your head is facing up and your butt is facing down and everything in between is as straight as you can make it. But, so that's mindfulness of body. That's the starting point. And you retain that mindfulness of body by making sure your posture remains correct. Mindfulness of sensations includes the cleansing of the stale breath and so on, as we discussed yesterday. But principally, mindfulness of sensations is important when your sensations are distracting you. You're meditating and you start to feel sick or in pain. Stop meditating on whatever you were meditating on and look at the pain. Look at the sickness. Pain is not fun. It's not a gift. But for a meditator, it's an opportunity, because it is easier to be mindful of pain than it is of neutral sensations. Mindfulness of mind is the generic form of what our practice is really concerned with. And mindfulness of thoughts is how we deal with the kleshas. Now, you don't have to restrict yourself in dealing with kleshas to seeing through them, seeing the stuff of which they're in fact not made, seeing that there's nothing there. You can do that, but you can also do other things. For example, when you are dealing with certain situations regularly in your life, and you know that you tend to get angry, you can prepare yourself beforehand. Remind yourself, I'm going to be dealing with so-and-so today, or such and such thing, and I know that I can get angry under these circumstances or dealing with this person. I'm going to try my best not to get angry. The first time, you may still get angry, but you'll recognize that you're angry sooner. The second time, you'll start to get angry, but you won't completely get angry. You'll recognize that you're becoming angry before it's fully blown. And the third time, you may not get angry at all at the person. What's important is, at that point, not to give up and think that you've conquered the problem. Because if you then stop the momentum of habit from increasing, the good habit of not getting angry, the old habit of getting angry at the person will come back. So that's an example of mindfulness of thoughts in a very, very simple way. You just prepare yourself beforehand. Another way that's also very helpful, especially in dealing with anger, self-pity, pain, and so on, is to remind yourself to think of others. A lot of our suffering is because we feel that we don't deserve it. So I feel sick, I feel pain, and then the next thing is, why me? Which implies that somebody else should suffer that way. I mean, come on, that's stupid. But that's what we think. Why me? Of all the beings in the universe, why do I have to have a headache? You know, it's like, we actually think this shit. So the solution is to make the aspiration that your headache, or whatever it is, serve instead of everybody else's headache. And that you get all the headaches in the universe drawn into yours. It will not get rid of the pain. You can't be doing it to get rid of the pain. If you do it to get rid of the pain, then you're still being selfish. But what it will do is it will make you less self-obsessed. And also, it will cause the experience of the pain to actually purify karma that would otherwise have ripened later as something much, much worse. When it's said that a Dharma practitioner who willingly experiences a headache purifies the karma that would otherwise have caused a horrendous and long rebirth in a lower state, that's true, but it's only true if you do it right. First of all, willingly experience a headache doesn't mean that you don't take Advil, you don't take the stuff, I want to experience this suffering for the benefit of all beings. That's just, if you choose for the sake of your long-term health not to take pharmaceuticals, that's fine. But don't do it out of the suffering saint mentality. Willingly experiencing it means that you do what you can to alleviate the sickness or physical pain, but if there's some you can't alleviate, then you you think of others in the way that I described, and you try to draw everybody else's pain out of them with the aspiration that they never experience it. And then that will purify karma. Suffering just by itself doesn't purify karma. Suffering about which we become resentful accumulates more negative karma. So suffering is not good. Suffering is only good if you use it the right way. Of itself, it's not good. And there was something else that reminded me of. Suffering saints. Can't remember. So those are two additional ways that we can work with pain and also with emotions. By preparing ourselves beforehand for the emotion and the klesha, and by accepting inevitable pain that you can't get rid of, and then trying to take on the pain of others in your imagination instead. Now, one of the implications of this is that we are not supposed to mortify ourselves. We're not supposed to put ourselves in painful situations that are unnecessary, or allow ourselves to be abused by others. And this needs to be stated because people listen to the Mahayana teachings and they hear all these things like, the Buddhist equivalent of turn the other cheek, and, all of this stuff like the Buddha is not saying that we should be doormats, that we should allow ourselves to be abused. The point is not to get angry. There's a difference. If you look at the 37 practices of the Bodhisattvas, it will tell you things like it is the practice of a Bodhisattva to, when someone they have treated with great kindness betrays them, not only not to get angry, but to pray all the more for that person's well-being and awakening. Now, it's not saying that you should not protect yourself reasonably. It's saying don't get angry. Don't act out of anger. That's the stanza about betrayal, and there are other ones, And the attitude that is explained with that one is that of a parent and a child. If your child acts out, you don't hate them. You don't wish them ill. You're actually more concerned about their well-being than otherwise. It actually brings up concern. And you want to find the best way to respond appropriately that will keep your child safe so they can grow up safe and in peace. Well, that's the kind of attitude. It sounds awfully paternalistic, but it isn't really. That's the kind of attitude that a Mahayana practitioner needs to take. But that does not mean that you allow yourself to be abused. You protect yourself from abuse. Because if you allow yourself to be abused, then nobody abuses only one person. Anybody who abuses people, there are people who don't abuse anybody, and then there are people who abuse people. And if people abuse people, it's going to be more than one person. So if you allow someone to abuse you, you are, in a sense, setting up someone else to be victimized by the same person. So there is a difference in Mahayana ethics, between anger and appropriate behavior. You know, it is not appropriate to enable an abuser, but it is also not appropriate to not enable them simply out of anger. Okay. Questions?
I'm not sure this is a question, but I guess it is. I couldn't help but think of the precious human body
Mm-hmm.
and what we have been discussing.
Mm-hmm.
Can you summarize the connection between the precious human body and what we have been discussing?
Well, you mean that we have the right to prolong the existence of our precious human body when others would take it from us?
Something like, well, just the, I mean, I can say that before Buddhism, I don't think I saw my body as being precious particularly.
Even when you were practicing belly dancing?
Oh, come on, that's confidential.
It is? I'm sorry, I didn't know that. You were mentioned that on the couch of the degenerates.
That was a confession. Remember we were confessing? But
Oh,
no.
I thought you were bragging. My God, if I'd ever done that, I would so brag about it. That shit's cool. That's really cool.
All right.
I'm sorry.
So,
I didn't realize I was
do think that
violating
there's
the
something in
confidence.
the Shinrezi practice about the precious
Yes.
human body. And that it could be like foam on a beer, okay? Since we're talking degenerately. So,
Basically, and this is the reason why it often comes first, as the first contemplation. Basically, we have a lot of self-dislike. We have fundamentally, because we don't recognize our own Buddha nature. Superficially, because on top of that, we've piled all sorts of levels of ignorant projections about ourselves. We don't like ourselves. And it's tempting to think that people who society thinks of as really, really cool do like themselves, except if you get to know any of those people, you find out that they don't like themselves either, you know. And so it's symptomatic of our ignorance to disparage ourselves. Therefore, when we come to a spiritual path and we're beginning, we feel unworthy. We feel, I'm not worthy of this. Maybe I can just sneak in and sit in the back and hope they don't notice me or something. We all feel that way, or at least I did. And that's an obstacle. That's the first obstacle that has to be overcome. We have to learn that we have the right to be here. And the way that that's taught traditionally is to point out two things. First thing is that our nature, our true nature, is perfect. It lacks nothing that's good, and it has nothing intrinsic within it that's bad. It's perfect. It's not neutral. It's perfect. It's not just good, it's not just excellent, it's perfect. The second thing is that although every being, and we don't know what types of beings there are out there. I mean, we neatly divide beings into 6 categories because it's easy to remember, but there's infinite. You know, I mean, just think of just the animals on this planet. I mean, you know, there's infinite stuff and out there. And as Sutta Rinpoche said, the human realm in another world, on one world they might look like carpets to us or rugs, and on another world they might look like trees. But they'd be, if they had the equivalent type of intelligence, then they would be the human realm in that world. So I think he was thinking about high gravity and low gravity planets, but I don't know. I mean, that's just comparing what he said to Carl Sagan. Anyway, so the second thing, we have to realize that first, because we have Buddha nature, and secondly, because we have been born in a species that can do stuff, a lot of stuff. Human beings can do more good and more evil than any of the other animal species on this planet. We kill more than lions and tigers. We destroy the environment more than termites. The list is endless. I mean, we've now got to the point where we're not going to have water anymore. 3/5 of us live on a continent with 7 rivers that start in Tibet, and the Himalayan snowmass is melting faster than the North and South Pole. 3/5 of us live in Asia. And there ain't going to be any water there. 30 years. We are the most destructive species. Dinosaurs were badass. They're big and, but they didn't destroy everything. And it took an asteroid or a meteor or something to wipe them out. But we're doing it to ourselves. Anyway, so human beings can do terrible things. But what gives us the ability to do terrible things also makes us capable of doing wonderful things. For every person who invents a new form of machine gun, there's also somebody who invents a new medicine. For every person who wants to destroy the environment, there's someone who wants to save it. For every person who doesn't care about others and who tries to make money at the expense of others, there's somebody who uses their money to save others' lives. So there are two things about being human. We have incredible potential, incredible abilities. And the second thing is we really have to choose carefully. As human beings, we can't just sit back. We can't, there's no middle here. There's no neutral zone. If we're not actively opposing tyranny, misogyny, racism, environmental destruction, all the things. If we're not actively opposing them, we are supporting them simply by remaining silent. That was talked about by people during the Holocaust, and it was talked about by Dr. Martin Luther King in some of his speeches. If you are not actively opposing evil, you are abetting it. What does it say? All it takes for bad people to take over the world is for good people to keep silent. So that's all part of the precious human body. We have this tremendous ability, and we have to choose how we use it. Are we going to use it to make the world a better place, hopefully a place on which we can all live for a couple more centuries? Or are we just going to consume? Now, His Holiness said something about this that I found very, very helpful. He said that, and we've been talking a lot about anger. And he said that, we think that anger and hatred are our biggest problems. But we have one problem that's worse, and that's apathy. Because there are going to be haters. There are always going to be people who are filled with hatred. But there are far more people who are apathetic. And it's when we're apathetic that we allow the haters to take over. You know.
So what I think you're saying is that this teaching about the mindfulness will help us as humans to fight or whatever.
Well, I don't know if any of the stuff that I've said over the last 2 days is going to help anybody, but if I do know that the reason the precious human body is presented as usually the first contemplation is to remind us that we have potential, we have capacity, we have this. That's why Gyampopa goes back to the Sanskrit word purush, which means a human being. And purush means somebody who's got power. We have power. We need to take responsibility, take ownership for our power, and use it in the right way. And that's the message of the first contemplation, that you can achieve Buddhahood because you have the two necessary criteria. You have Buddha nature, everybody does, and you're a human being. You're not an animal. You're not in an existence where there's just no opportunity to practice spiritually. And you're not a god who thinks that they're immortal and isn't. But if we restrict our discussion of the precious human body to the traditional, 8 unrestful states and 10 positive conditions of resources and so on, people just go to sleep because they've heard that and they're inoculated against it. They're jaded. And this is a big problem that we have in this country with Dharma, and it may be true in other countries as well. We've heard it all so many times that we're jaded to it. We're impervious to it. We're like, like a duck's waterproof feathers. That just the water off a duck's back. We say, that's the problem. So if you go through the lists with people, you say, yes, you weren't born in a hell. You weren't born as a prata. You weren't gonna. People just zone out. They don't hear it. I suspect that most people don't even believe it. You have to really connect with what you feel, what you care about. The precious human body message is that we need to be activists, and we need to meditate, and we need to be activists who are not angry, and that's really hard. But so, it's the only game in town.
The great self.
Mm-hmm.
So you touched on it, but you didn't really fill it out.
It's a definition of the state of Buddhahood itself. In other words, it's where the Buddha nature, which is the Dharmakaya, is in a state of twofold purity. The original purity of it's never been stained, and the second purity of awakening, which is the removal of secondary veils. So it's like the difference between a gold statue underground and the same statue revealed. The statue hasn't changed, but access to it has. So the state of Buddhahood is called, theoretically, in that context, great self, because it's a state of perfect qualities. Now the Sanskrit is Mahatma, just like we use for Gandhi. It's the same, great soul or great self.
Well, it sounds similar to the Übermensch and the Atman. I mean, I don't quite...
Übermensch, no, that's Nietzsche. Nietzsche comes with baggage. I'm not going near Nietzsche. And it's the same term as Atman, but it's understood differently. You can't assume that words mean the same things in different contexts. I mean, even Tibetan words, let alone Sanskrit. And it's interesting that there are Sanskrit words that are one word used differently in different contexts, and Tibetans have created stipulative translations for them to distinguish between those concepts. Like, for example, the words Yeshe, which we think of as wisdom, primordial knowing, knowing from the beginning, and Shepa, which is just knowing or cognition, are the same word in Sanskrit, jnana. The Tibetan translators, when jnana was used to mean a state of awakened wisdom, they added the ye prefix, which is not in the Sanskrit. You know.
I just was curious how they knew that the stipulative meaning was different.
From the
From commentarial?
From the guidance of the pundits.
Okay.
In those days, and this is the source of our tradition of lungs, according to His Holiness. A lung, or agama, was not just originally being read the text. It was the text being read and explained word by word to you by the pundit with whom you were working. And that was the transmission of it. And so they would read the text to them, but then they would go through it word by word in exhaustive detail. That's why if you look at anything in the Kanjur or Tenjur, it will say this was translated by such and such pundit and such translator. You know, they always worked one-to-one with pundits. And that was by design. That was the way it was set up. They did it when they went to India. They did it at Samye when there were, when they had these translation ventures. And so their interpretation was based on the explanation of the pundits. For example, the translation of Buddha as Sangye. Buddha does not mean Sangye. Buddha means awakened, but it has the awakened person, but it has the connotation of fully developed and also a kind of clean, full development. So they chose to translate it not as Sepa. As Gampopa points out in the Jewel Ornament, a literal translation would be Sepa, awakened, not asleep. But they translated it as Sangye, and they translated Bodhi as Changchup to bring out the connotations of the term over. And this was, according to people I've talked to, this was based on the advice and instruction they received from the pundits, the Indian pundits with whom they were working. Sometimes literal translations are very, very poor. Because they don't give people anything. Other times you can do it, and it works out. It works out well.
Well, shifting gears a little bit, as we were practicing the mindfulness of dharmas, I remembered that when a period of time when I did a lengthy sitting meditation retreat, that I was sitting on a cushion on a floor that was made out of wood, maple or oak, I don't remember, and there were patterns in the wood. So I would sit during the sessions, and sometimes, my gaze would be somewhat downward, and so in my visual field would be the wood. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden, the patterns in the wood took on some sort of meaning. Mm-hmm. Like they looked like an animal or a face or something. And that sort of, I could never really figure out exactly what the dividing line between sort of merely sort of resting your gaze on something is and beginning to sort of have a kind of a storyline or a narrative about it. And in the context of what thought is, is there sort of like this aspect of the mental consciousness which is receptive and one that's more kind of constructive?
What you're describing is, I think it's pareidolia. I used to call it pareidolia, but I think it's pareidolia. Let me look it up because I want to get the term right if I'm going to be all over the internet, or I'm going to get more mean letters. Pareidolia. Cognitive scientists say, let's look at it scientifically first, and then go to the Buddhist. Pareidolia. Pareidolia. Okay.
Could you spell that?
Pareidolia. Pareidolia is when we see patterns where there are no patterns. And it's something that apparently we've evolved. You know, they study the behavior of different species in terms of can they recognize faces or not, like ravens recognize people's faces and stuff. They did an experiment where they had somebody wearing a Dick Cheney mask and being mean to ravens, and somebody wearing some other mask and being nice to them. And the ravens took a dislike. And then the people switched roles, and they still didn't like the person wearing the Dick Cheney mask. The most famous example of this is probably in the 80s when people thought they saw a face on Mars. You remember that? It was a big deal. They thought they saw a huge structure visible from this planet with telescopes that looked like a sort of humanoid alien sort of face. But of course, it's just perspective. Obviously, our notion of constellations is the same thing, because these stars have nothing whatsoever to do with one another in most cases. Cognitive scientists say, if I remember correctly, that this is something that we evolved as human beings in order to be able to recognize, I forget if it was our predators or our prey. Because we're kind of in the, we're in between the lions and the deer on the food chain, I guess. And so, but anyway, that's something we developed for that. And so your mind, your brain tendencies, it's okay to talk about the brain in Buddhism, because when they talk about, the pathways that thoughts and wind travel, they're talking about that, but in part. Your mind has the habit of doing that. Mm-hmm. So especially when it's fatigued and or bored. And meditation is quite boring. Mm-hmm. Your mind will look for something better to do. And so it will see patterns. It will see the Virgin Mary in toast. It will see, clouds that look like dragons, and
So when you're sort of just taking in, when you're gazing with your eyes on something that's in your visual field, but you're not particularly focused on it, is that a thought? I mean, so there's there is some sense perception going on.
if it's conscious, this question came up last summer, and Lama Chötop
I
said
know,
yes,
I know.
it is a thought.
Okay.
And I was trying to go for the Jomgulo Dutai's three
I
things,
remember
and
that.
he didn't like
He didn't
that.
bite.
Yeah, he didn't like that, and he sort of.
But I'm not satisfied
Yeah,
with saying that
yeah.
that's a thought.
Yeah.
There is some transition between
Yeah.
the receptivity to sensory experience.
Okay, I'm looking at the patterns, since we're talking about patterns in wood, which is a really good thing, because mostly it doesn't inspire pareidolia. Did we decide it was pareidolia or pareidolia? I can't remember.
I thought you said dolia.
Okay, so pareidolia, whatever that thing is called, the Virgin and the toast thing. So I'm looking at it, and because there's the intention of looking at it, that is a conceptual function of the
Yes.
mental consciousness. But I'm not I had a moment where I was thinking dots, because there are dots as well as lines in this. And then I stopped that. I just said, okay, let's not do that. And I can look at the pattern and not think about it,
Yes.
but still intentionally look at it. This will come up big time in the
All
summer.
right, but see, yeah, but it's a topic of interest. You know,
Yeah.
there are shifts in the way that our mental consciousness is functioning that
Definitely.
are significant.
Yes.
So a bit of a tangent, but you know the way.
Now, don't forget that the context in which he answered that question was the abrupt.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
A kind of a
Yeah.
severing. Okay, okay. But I'm not sure how to do that.
I know. Context is, but context is very, very
Okay.
important.
All right. But I was also noticing too that as I was falling asleep, you know, that there's a shift when we are awake and experiencing things with our senses in an awake state, that there is once again some sort of transition that can be when we fall asleep, there's like a kind of feeling of falling,
Yes, yeah.
of making an abrupt shift, like shifting gears and, you know, like from one gear to another in a car, that where it's the transmission's a little rough,
But it's several gears.
probably.
Because there's the,
The visual and
no, first thing is you start to feel the blissful sensation of falling asleep.
yeah, it is.
And the bliss causes the desire to sleep. So the bliss brings up the desire to sleep. And that's the first main shift. And then after that, you start to withdraw from the senses.
Yes.
And to the degree that you withdraw from the senses, so while you're still partially able to see and hear, thoughts start to arise as images.
Yes.
And you're in the state that is called hypnagogus. Hypnagogus is when they talk about reality, experiences, and dreams, hypnagogus is what they mean by experiences. They're clear about it in autobiographies and stuff. So you're half
Oh,
asleep.
you mean meditators when they're talking about
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you're half asleep at that point, but you're not. You could still be nudged awake, and you can still be nudged awake from deep sleep if the
Yes.
stimulus is
strong enough.
Is strong enough.
Okay.
But at that point, it starts with the bliss and the
chasing after
desire, and then I have sleep problems. So what happens to me is I will experience the bliss and of falling asleep, and then the desire to fall deeper asleep, and then I'll bounce back.
Yeah.
And then I can't get back to that level of comfort, and therefore I can't get deeper because I can't fall asleep.
So
Yeah.
how are things changing between hypnagogia and dreaming? What's going on there?
I think hypnagogia or hypnagogic state or whatever they call it, I don't know, it's like pareidolia, parodalia, Aunt Dahlia in Jeeves and Wooster. Hypnagogus is half asleep. It's what we say, half asleep.
So there's a mixture of the mental consciousness in waking state and mental consciousness in sleep state.
Yeah.
And you're dealing with input, as it were, visual input that's more mentally generated than through your visual.
Yeah, and they mix together.
And they do mix together, yeah.
And that's often when people hear things and see things that they take as significant. And yeah, it's an interesting sort of twilight state. And actually, the twilight that they give you for some surgical procedures and a lot of tests nowadays is a little bit like that too.
Okay. And is it correct that in deep sleep, the mental consciousness becomes inactive?
My understanding is it becomes dormant, yes.
Okay.
But you know, deep sleep is like a bandwidth, so there
Yeah.
got to be different. Just like dreams.
You mean bandwidth in terms of like electrical activity of the brain?
Well, that too, but it's I think
Oh,
it's
but
mostly
bandwidth in the
delta
sense
waves.
that that's a realm, but not
But
a.
it's a realm, so there's got to be light deep sleep and
Mhm.
really deep sleep. Just like with the dream state, there's light sleep dreams and deep sleep dreams. And sleep dreams, it's much easier to know you're dreaming, but it's harder to make changes and have them stick. Whereas in deep sleep dream, it's harder to recognize or maintain lucidity, but it's easier to change things.
Once you do.
Yeah.
Once you do, okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Lama. I do have another question about dreaming, if that's okay.
Sure.
I'm confused about dreaming.
Okay.
On the one hand, my understanding, and I've spoken to Lama about this, is it's just a dream. It's just a dream. It's just a dream. And I walked away thinking, why should I bother talking about dreaming when it's just a dream? So don't talk about it.
Yeah.
But that's not what he said. He didn't say don't talk about it. He said
Yeah.
it's just a dream,
Well, he loves to talk about his dreams.
which I noticed.
That's breakfast
which
conversation.
is really confusing
Because
me.
his dreams are like Steven Spielberg movies. I
But-
mean, they're like, you know, there's
Yeah.
aliens coming here, and
I've
he's
come
got
to
like
that understanding. So not only am I confused that Lama loves to talk about his dreams, I'm also confused when I read in some of the practices that dreams can be a way of understanding that you're making certain progress.
Dreams are like the astrology column in the daily paper. You know, there's all these astrology columns, and you know, it's like the whole month. People like, you know, everybody born from December this to January that or whatever. Most of the time, it's got nothing to do with anything. But if something very significant is going on in your life, sometimes it's on the money. Like when after coming out of retreat, when I was about to enter into a relationship and I didn't know it, the morning I read the thing, it said, that which has been forbidden will now become available. I mean, you couldn't get better than that. And so sometimes it's on the money. Dreams are like that. In the case of dreams, dreams are like our thoughts. They're wild. And because we're asleep, then we take them to be real. And so we call it neutral or double delusion. There's the regular delusion of thinking, and then there's the double delusion of thinking that the things we think are real, which we do all the time. But we do it doubly in dreams, you know. And so much of our dreams are garbage, nonsense. And even when a dream has significance, there will be some garbage in there, usually. They do divide the dreams into 3 phases in your night's sleep. But now, I'll give you the times that are given in the texts and oral instructions, but the problem is that depends on what your sleep cycle is. So like somebody with a night job who goes to sleep like at 7 in the morning, the times are going to be all different. What they say is that the dreams you have for the first third of your sleep, you know, so if you sleep 6 hours for the first 2 hours or something, but then what I wonder is if you sleep longer, does each phase stretch out? I don't think so. Because my experience is I only have bad dreams unless I get a really prolonged sleep, which I get about once a week. And then by the time I'm waking up, my brain will generate positive images. They say for the first third, you are, it's just habits. just stuff you're thrashing out. Could be habits in the day, could be habits from the past, could be a mixture. Then around midnight and the early part of the morning, before there's any lightning, it's demonic attacks. Demonic attacks. Attacks by demons, spirits, things that go bump in the night. Yeah, demonic attacks.
Oh no.
Well, they know. Yeah. But they say, and that doesn't mean anything. So they say that neither of those two periods' dreams have any meaning. The first third is just your own nonsense, and the second third is demonic attacks. You know. And then, but it's the last third, when you get to about 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning, that stuff may have value. Personally, I still get demonic attacks until about 6 or 7. And, you know, the demonic attack thing, I wouldn't worry too much about it. You don't need to do anything. Lama Chokdop gets those dreams and he whips their asses. And that's what he tells us about. Last night I had this demon come into my dream and I did this and this and this and this and this.
But when you're dreaming, aren't you supposed to see all beings as deities?
If you can. But I think he likes to kick ass in his dreams.
Isn't that kind of dangerous to
No.
attack a deity?
No, they're not deities. There are things in your mind.
See, that's why I'm so confused.
Yeah, I know, it's confusing. Okay, when you're dreaming, the things you're seeing are your thoughts come to life, as it were. They may or may not correspond to external entities. So, for example, if tonight I dream of you, you exist, so to speak. But the Sally in my dream is just my imagination. It may incorporate accurate memories, like I may remember, you know, your mala and your sweater and the way your hair's cut now, but it's not really you. It's just my dream. A lot of people get really flipped out about this, and they think that, you know, lamas are doing stuff to them and their dreams are visiting them. I don't think so. Yeah.
So bottom line, don't worry about it and just let it go.
If it's if a dream is really significant, you'll know. The feeling is very different. You won't forget it. It will stick with you, and that's quite rare. I would say that in my life, in my adult life, I've probably, and I'm almost 60, so in 40 years, let's say, I've probably only had 3 or 4 dreams, maybe just 3, I can't remember, that I would consider worthy of recollection.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I wrote it down. Relating to mindfulness of thoughts and where they're looking directly at the thought, then the stream of karma ceases there.
If the thought does not produce a subsequent thought, yes. That karma, not all karma.
Right. Then I was wondering if that or this mindfulness of thoughts could be related somehow. Curious how it relates to visualization practice and how holding it, a mental image, and then straying from it, how to come back. Just how does the process can be tied together?
Well, that's an important point, because visualizations are holding on to a certain thought, but it's not actually the same thought. It's a different thought each moment. And each moment you return from distraction, you're regenerating the visualization. And that's why Karma Chame Rinpoche says, regardless of different generation styles, ultimately all deities are generated complete in an instant of recollection, because that's what you do every time you return from distraction.
Could you recommend, this is getting a little personal, but I notice myself really straying for long periods of time.
Mm-hmm.
Could you recommend a way to maybe hold the image more clear or shorten the periods of straying?
You're talking about during visualization
Yeah,
practice?
mudra practice with Vajrasattva.
Many people find Vajrasattva challenging because in your previous practice you were physically very active. And Vajrasattva practice is the first time you sort of have to sit there and really, and also the visualization is much simpler in terms of the number of figures, but more close to home. You know, you're being given an enema, a holy enema. I mean, that's what it is, right? No, but it comes out the bottom. It is. It is. It's a moral enema. You know, we talk about moral enigmas. This is a moral enema. And some people really like it, and other people find it intensely irritating. I remember one of my retreat teachers used to talk about how much he had disliked Vajrasattva practice. He'd done about 500,000 of them. Because, I mean, you end up doing lots and lots of ngundos if you're a recidivist like me. And so, I mean, I've done about, I think, 600,000 of them. And but I don't mind it that much. But he didn't like it. He just, you know. People usually either like Vajrasattva and hate mandala, or they hate Vajrasattva and like mandala offering, depending upon what, you know, their makeup. And I think that if your mind is straying, the thing to do would be to touch on different aspects of the visualization. So sometimes think about the meaning of the mantra as a supplication. Sometimes focus on different parts of Vajrasattva's body, his face, his jewelry. You know, get as precise with the jewelry and the color of the upper and lower robes, and, you know, the 13 ornaments of a peaceful Sambhogakaya. And sometimes focus mostly on the Amrita descending through your body and all the stuff that it's pushing out. Sometimes focus on regret. Think of things that you did in this life and things that you can infer that you did based on your experiences in this life. Because they have a saying, if you want to know what you did, look at what you are now. If you want to know what you'll be in the future, look at what you're doing now. So, you know, focus on that. Sometimes focus on the deity inseparable from your root guru and Guru Rinpoche. You know, all sorts of things. One big thing is sometimes peaceful deities, and especially deities that are like white, like Vajrasattva and Chenrezig, can bring up a kind of dullness. So what you have to do is remember that he's brilliantly light. Don't visualize him as chalky or gray or dull, or, you know, like a wall. You know, make him luminous, and the light breaks into 5 colors everywhere it comes out. You know, it has to be, make it brighter. and make the jewelry very, very shiny and not clunky. You really need to look at Indian jewelry and learn, how it connects, how the whole headdress thing works, because it's very different from Rothel deities. And you really have to learn how the five garments and the 8 pieces of jewelry all fit together.
One thing that really just, when you talked about being an activist,
Mm-hmm.
and do you look at retreat practice as a form of activism, or?
I think it can be, depending upon motivation, but obviously it's if it is, it's very long term in its goals. I think that there are certain people in among human beings who are natural contemplatives, and for such people, prolonged retreat is excellent. There are other people who are not. I'm not a natural contemplative. I'm a talker. And so, this is something that the Catholic Church recognized a long time ago. So they have like contemplative orders, like the Trappists, and the women's equivalent, and then they have teaching orders and service orders and all these kinds of things. People just have different things. I think it's good for everyone to do some practice. I think everyone should do certain things who's Buddhist, but that's up to them what they do. And I think that if you're someone who really wants to do retreat, then you should do it, because it does bless the environment. I mean, we have more means at our disposal than simply, pamphlets and voting and things like that. But I would agree with His Holiness Dalai Lama when he says that prayers alone are not going to save this planet. Any other questions? All right, then. Let's dedicate the virtue. So start on page 7 and then through to the end. Sonam de ye dam je zeng ba nye dom ne nye be ra na bam je ne jeng ga na je ba la dum ba ye sim ben zo le ro wa wan de ye je wo gun sunam ye je zo de sunam ye je le jong we dam ba guan ye dam ba jo jo zem ne ram bon je manje ba nam je jo je ma nyam ba me ba dam gon ne gon do ba wa ro sem je dam je de dan den jo je ngan ro dam je dan do dom ba jo jang jo zam ba gan da zai jo ba yang gun je Sangje Rengje Zhen Dambegar Jangguan Doi Jan Do Do Ling Ba Ye Zamje Me Zhong Dembe Zang An Ju Si Je Zhong Da